Let's now cut across to London, where the embattled Prime Minister Boris Johnson is addressing the House of Commons. Let's listen in.
Mr. Speaker, it's also been 40 years since the death of Terence Higgins. Terence worked at Hansard by day and Heaven by night before he sadly died of AIDS. The Labour Party and the Terence Higgins Trust are committed to ending new cases of HIV by 2030. Together we can. Mr. Speaker, last week a government minister was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. I want to quote the victim's account. He says, "He grabbed my arse and then he slowly moved his hand down in front of my groin. I froze." I accept that's not easy listening, but it's a reminder to all those propping up this Prime Minister just how serious the situation is. He knew the accused minister had previously committed predatory behaviour, but he promoted him to a position of power anyway. Why?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that individual, the member for Tamworth, no longer has the Conservative whip. He no longer has a job. He is no longer, as soon as I was made aware of the allegation that he has just read out, Mr. Speaker, and the complaint that was made, he lost his status as a Conservative MP, and he is now the subject, Mr. Speaker, of an independent investigation to the Complaints and Grievances panel. And that is entirely right. And I want to say to him, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to him that I abhor bullying and abuse of power anywhere in Parliament, in this party or in any other party.
None of that explains why he promoted him in the first place. And we've heard it all before. We know who he really is. Before he was found out, he's reported to have said he's handsy. That's the problem. Pincher by name, pincher by nature. Now, has the Prime Minister ever said words to that effect? And I'm not asking for bluster and half-truths. We've all had enough of that. Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to trivialise what happened. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'm not, because the very serious complaints have been raised against the member for Tamworth, and they're now being investigated, Mr. Speaker. It is true that a complaint was raised when he was in the Foreign Office, and the matter was resolved. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker, that it was raised with me. I greatly regret that he continued in office, and I've said that. I have said that before, Mr. Speaker. I have said that before, Mr. Speaker. But it is now the subject of an independent investigation, and that is the right thing, Mr. Speaker. And frankly, I think the people of this country would like also to hear. They would like also to hear about other jobs that are held by people in this country, not least the 500,000 people we got off welfare into work in the last 6 months alone, Mr. Speaker. Those are things that are making differences to the lives of people up and down the country, and I'm proud of it.
No one's cheering that.
No denial. And he says the matter was resolved when he means it was upheld. Exactly. And they're all sitting there as if this is normal behaviour. Exactly. When that young man reported his attack to a government whip, she asked him if he was gay. When he said that he was, she replied, "That doesn't make it straightforward." That comment will sicken anyone who's experienced sexual assault and then be made to feel like they somehow asked for it, or who worry that prejudice means their complaint won't be taken seriously. Will he apologise for those disgraceful comments on behalf of his government?
Mr. Speaker, I've already said that I regret very much that the member for Tamworth continued to hold office after the complaint was made against him in the Foreign Office, and it was resolved in the Foreign Office. His apology was accepted, but clearly that was not enough. And in hindsight, Mr. Speaker, I should have realised that he would not change. However, when it came to the Friday of last week, and when I was given the information that he's read out about the complaint that was made against the honourable member, I acted immediately, Mr. Speaker, and I took the whip away from him. And we will not tolerate that kind of behaviour in this or any other party, Mr. Speaker. And what we also want to do is to help people up and down the country with the things that also matter to them, like cutting their taxes, Mr. Speaker, by £330 this year, which is what we're doing.
Keir Starmer.
Doesn't that just sum him up? Awful behaviour, unacceptable in any walk of life. It's there for all to see, but he ignores it. It was the same when his ally was on the take from the lobbyists. It was the same when his Home Secretary was bullying staff. It was the same when taxpayers' money was being abused. And it was the same when he and his mates parted their way through lockdown. Anyone quitting now, after defending all that, hasn't got a shred of integrity. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the first recorded case of the sinking ships fleeing the rat?
Mr. Speaker, look, he talks about. He should hear what his lot say about him, Mr. Speaker. He talks about integrity. He wanted to install the member for Islington North into number 10, Mr. Speaker. That's what he wanted to do. Imagine what our country and what the world would be like now. He talks about integrity. He voted 48 times to overturn the will of the British people and take us back into the European Union. And by the way, listening to his muddled speech the other day, that is exactly what he would do again. Mr. Speaker, he talks about integrity, but Mr. Speaker, he has voted time and time again against sanctions on criminals that would put them behind bars. This is the government that is tough on... I'm sorry, he talks about integrity. He is himself facing a criminal investigation, Mr. Speaker, which he asked me to resign.
Keir Starmer.
What a pathetic spectacle. The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade. Some self-respect. Mr. Speaker, for a week, he's had them defending his decision to promote a sexual predator. Every day, the lines he's forced them to take have been untrue. First, that he was unaware of any allegation. Untrue. Then, he was unaware of any specific allegation. Untrue. Then he was unaware of any serious specific allegation. And now he wants them to go out and say that he simply forgot that his whip was a sexual predator. Anyone with anything about them would be long gone from his front bench. In the middle of a crisis, doesn't the country deserve better than a Z-list cast of nodding dogs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's exactly when times are tough and when the country faces pressures on the economy and pressures on their budgets, Mr. Speaker, and when we have the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly the moment that you'd expect a government to continue with its work, not to walk away, Mr. Speaker, and to get on with our job and to focus on the things that matter to the people of this country. And so we're not only cutting taxes today, Mr. Speaker, we're putting £1,200 into every one of the 8 million most vulnerable households in the country, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the strength of our economy and thanks to the decisions that we took, Mr. Speaker, which he opposed at the time.
Keir Starmer.
The only thing he's delivering is chaos. I started this session with a quote from the young victim in all this, how he froze when he was attacked. When I was prosecuting rapists, I heard that from victims all the time. Victims said they froze because it's not about sex, it's about power. And the power the disgraced government minister had was handed to him by that Prime Minister. And he's only in power because he's been propped up for months by a corrupt corrupted party defending the indefensible. So it's no longer a case about swapping the person at the top. Isn't it clear? The only way the country can get the fresh start it deserves is by getting rid of the lot of them.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this.
We've got to get through Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this government and that opposition is we have a plan and they do not. We're getting on. They want to focus on this type of issue, Mr. Speaker. We're going to get on with our jobs. We're going to control prices, Mr. Speaker, by not giving in to the union barons. They're paid by the union barons, and they're proud of it. We were the first European country to arm the Ukrainians, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of that. And those guys, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite, not only do they want to put Mr. Corbyn into number 10, the member for Islington North, but 8 of them, including the shadow Foreign Secretary, the shadow Deputy Leader, and 6 others, voted to get rid of our independent nuclear deterrent, Mr. Speaker. Today we are cutting taxes, we're helping 500,000 people into work, and thanks to the strength of our economy, we're helping people up and down the country, and we are going to continue to deliver on the mandate I was given.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Monday night, the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill reached its 3rd reading, and so with it the beginning of the end of the journey, a long journey to make sure the service and sacrifice of those who served in Iraq, Afghanistan and now Northern Ireland is not rewritten by those who seek only to line their own pockets. But would the Prime Minister agree with me that never again can we allow such a gulf to open up between this place and those who serve? Never again must they be made to feel like we are not on their side. And will he redouble his commitment to make sure this is the best country in the world, to serve in the military and be a veteran all their family?
Thank you, my honourable friend, very much. I thank you for all the work that he's done for veterans and continues to do. This bill will give veterans the certainty they deserve, and we're fulfilling the manifesto pledge to end the cycle of investigations, but also at the same time making sure that families can get the answers they need about what happened to their loved ones.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I give every best wish to the England and Northern Ireland ladies football team as they approach the Euro Championships. There's nothing better than seeing your teams in these finals. Can we also commemorate the passing 40 years ago of Terence Higgins and all those that have died from AIDS and sin? And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to join with me in passing condolences to the family of friends of the Scottish football goalkeeping legend Andy Gorham, who sadly passed far too early last weekend. He will long live in the memory of the best goalkeeper that many of us have seen. Mr. Speaker, it's easy to forget that only 10 days ago the Prime Minister was dreaming of a 3rd term. Mr. Speaker, you know, it's often said that a week is a long time in politics, but it turns out that 10 days is truly a lifetime. Because, let's face it, it's a minor miracle that the Prime Minister has even made it through to Prime Minister's questions, and he really ought to see the faces behind him, because, Prime Minister, it really is over. The Prime Minister is desperately clinging on to his own fantasy, but the public can't afford to put up with this farce of a government a minute longer. Today, we should be talking about the Tory cost of living crisis, soaring inflation and the growing costs of Brexit. But instead, it's always about him. How many more ministers need to quit before he finally picks up his pen and writes his own resignation letter? Perhaps that's what he's doing now.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I was just jotting down some notes on his question, which I thought was excellent when he was talking about the economy, because that is the issue that the country faces, and that is where this government is introducing, I think, the most important solution: helping families up and down the country with £1,200 going into their bank accounts right now, cutting taxes for 30 million people, £330 tax cut, and helping 500,000 people into work through the Way to Work scheme. That is a fantastic thing to be getting on and doing. That is the priority of this government, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm glad he likes it.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, nothing to see. We should all move on if we live in the world of the Prime Minister. You know, a few weeks ago I compared the Prime Minister to Monty Python's Black Knight. Actually, turns out I was wrong. He's actually the dead parrot. Whether he knows it or not, he's now an ex-Prime Minister. But he will leave behind two deeply damaging legacies. I hope the dishonesty of his leadership follows him out of the Downing Street door. But the other legacy is that of Brexit. And that will stay. Because I'm sad to say that the Labour Party now fully supports Brexit. Mr. Speaker, Scotland wants a different future, not just a different Prime Minister. So if the Prime Minister won't resign, will he call a general election and allow Scotland the choice of an independent future, free from the control of Westminster?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I noticed that his remark that the Labour Party have given up on returning to the European Union was not greeted with rapture by the benches opposite, and that's because it's not true. They want to go back in just as he does. I think that is a terrible mistake. It would be anti-democratic, Mr. Speaker. And as for the referendum that he wants, well, we had one of them, as I've told him before, in 2014.
Come on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
I think, Mr. Speaker, clearly, if there were circumstances in which I felt it was impossible for the government to go on and discharge the mandate that we've been given, or if I felt, for instance, that we were being frustrated in our desire to support the Ukrainian people, or over some major point, then I would. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
There's Savile Roberts.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Prime Minister, he puts political survival before public duty. Yeah. But people can see, even if he goes, it's not an if, it's a when, isn't it? Yeah. The same Westminster arrogance will continue to dictate our futures in Wales. Yeah. Does he want a medal for being the best recruiting sergeant for independence we could wish for?
Actually, Mr. Speaker, ever I look around the United Kingdom, I had a great talk with Mark Drakeford the other day, as well as talking to Nicola Sturgeon. I see the bonds of our union being strengthened the whole time, and I'm confident that they will continue to do so.
Link Drummond.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's town centre and levelling up funds have been very successful around the country, but there are a few town centres, like Waterlooville in Meon Valley, that are in desperate straits and haven't managed to get any funding, get a scheme into the present round of funding. Can my honourable friend assure me that future funds will be available to help declining high streets become fit for the 21st century and survive the post-pandemic?
I thank my honourable friend, and she's a great champion for Meon Valley, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister for Levelling Up at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The public clearly thinks that this government has lost the plot over the cost of living crisis. The Prime Minister may be aware that the average salary for a nurse is £36,000. For a primary teacher, it is £38,000. They, and indeed working people everywhere, are struggling to pay their rents and their mortgages. Given they can barely afford a £150,000 mortgage on a new home, can he tell this House how he could afford a £150,000 treehouse?
What I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, is that up and down the country, rather than talking about fantasy infrastructure, I can talk about real infrastructure. We are helping to unite and level up the people of this country with £650 billion of investment, helping to lift the aspirations and opportunities of people up and down the country. And thanks to the strength of our economy, we're helping exactly the people he describes with £1,200 going into their bank accounts to help them with the cost of living pressures.
Under the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
The Prime Minister knows that while he's Prime Minister, I want him to do all the good he can. While he's Prime Minister's Green and Present Land, can I refer him to EDM 1082 about the Goring Gap, the Chatsmore Farm, or to the Department of Levelling Up, the land above Goring Station, the farm in Worthing, which was fully protected and will be fully protected when another inspector says that Worthing Council protecting it will happen. Can I ask him to tell the government to withdraw their objection to Worthing Council's appeal against the absurd decision by a planning inspector to allow 482 homes to go on this green lung between Goring and Ferry?
Minister, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman very much, and he campaigns on this issue for some time. I will make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the development in Goring by sea.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 21st of January, the government committed £100 million from the Automotive Transformation Fund to British Wool, to a gigafactory in my constituency, Calais, Wansbeck. And as of today, Prime Minister, not a penny, not a single halfpenny is being received by the company. And it jeopardises up to 8,000 much-needed jobs. The tensions between the Prime Minister and the former Chancellor have sadly now been much exposed. And I'm telling you, Prime Minister, the betrayal of my constituents cannot be another broken promise of this government. Prime Minister, give them a nudge. Please instruct your new bestie to make sure that the cheque is in the post this afternoon, because who knows who'll be in that seat this time this afternoon, never mind next week.
Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on the passion with which he advocates investment in British Volt? And I totally share his enthusiasm. And actually, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Blythe Valley as well, who is a heroic campaigner on this issue. I can tell him that the letter was sent last night, Mr. Speaker, an in-principle offer of support for this project through. How about that? Hang on in there, Mr. Speaker. That's what I'm going to do.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.